so much for joining today. Welcome to Wellness Wednesday. Today I'm going to dive into a topic that many of us could use right now, and that is how to determine if you have a lower functioning immune system or your immune system is not up to par. Okay. So this is something I've actually been talking about in my webinars because right now I think it's very important have um, to have the ability to not only protect people from getting hospitalized and doing the reactive style care, but it's also important to understand and acknowledge. Hi Tiara, thanks for watching, hon. Um, and I think it's important to understand that when our immune system isn't functioning well, and how we can support ourselves. Okay, because as we know from the research, as we know from some of the articles out there, people who are ending up hospitalized are having what's called a cytokine storm. They're having a very large uptick in inflammation, and many of these patients have underlying conditions already. I'm just going to take the glasses off. Many of these patients have underlying conditions already. So it's important to understand that if you are somebody whether or not you have an underlying condition, if you have low function immune system, that's not something that typically requires a diagnosis to understand. Okay, this is more in the lines of functional medicine. That's why it's called functional. Okay, so it's understanding where we're not necessarily disease chasing. We're also looking at health from a standpoint of optimal wellness, and really where, like in the midst of chronic disease, we know that it takes years to develop chronic disease. So where does the chronic disease begin? It begins in the micro dysfunctions in the biochemistry and the cellular function. Okay. So if you are somebody who has a low functioning immunity, what does that look like? How can you spot it for yourself? And how can you get yourself some help with that? Okay, so it's important to understand that the immune system, many of the uh, parts of the immune system are the lymphatic system, so your lymph nodes, your spleen, which is underneath the left rib cage here, your bone marrow, your thymus gland in your neck, and then also your gut. So your gut, actually, your body has patches of cells that are all throughout different parts of the body. Specifically in the gut, they are the GALT and the MALT, so the gut-associated lymphatic tissue and the mucosal associated lymphatic tissue. And so these are places that create parts of the immune system, as well as your microbiome, the good bacteria in your gut. So things you might see if you have a decreased immunity. Okay, so knowing that, we might see low white blood cell count. Okay, so what's called leukopenia. So if you're looking back in your blood work, if you had an annual visit done within the last 2 years, looking back in your blood work to see if you have what's called leukopenia, which is the low white blood cells. You're also going to see percentages of the different types of blood cells broken up, the neutrophils, the monocytes, the lymphocytes, the basophils and eosinophils. So those are different types of white blood cells that kick up infections. If you are lower in those percentages, that means you typically have either a chronic infection or a decreased immunity. Okay, so that's something important to note. If you are somebody who is tired all the time, now I talk about fatigue all the time, especially when it pertains to emotional burnout or just in general chronic fatigue. Chronic fatigue, there are so many layers to it, and one of the layers can be an autoimmune issue. So an autoimmune issue is when your body actually is more of immunocompromised. Your body is immunocompromised. Your body actually recognizes its own self tissue as a foreign entity, and it begins to attack your own tissue. So if you have chronic fatigue, or really heavy limbs, things like that, that can be a sign of a lowered immunity. Other really common signs of low immunity are gastrointestinal distress. So if you are somebody with IBS, if you are somebody particularly who has been on a multitudes of antibiotics, you are definitely somebody who has an immunocompromised system, because what antibiotics do, besides treat pathogenic infection and bacteria, they also work to, they also kill the good bacteria. Okay, so basically, specific types of antibiotics will kind of destroy a multitude of bacteria, good or bad. So we need that good bacteria to help with our immune system. So it's important to understand that if you have been on a cycle of antibiotics, and say, and this is another point actually, is if you've had repeat infections. So if you are somebody who continually is like, man, I'm getting like a ton of sinus infections this year. I'm getting like I have UTIs, like I have there's recurrent UTIs. If you're getting chronic yeast infections, or thrush, if you're a nursing mother, things like that, those are key indicators that your body isn't fighting infections well and as it should. Okay. Fungal infections in particular are actually signs of lower immunity potentially as well. They can also be signs of vitamin deficiencies. Um, you can actually tell that if you aren't sure if you have that, is if you're not somebody who has some of the typical fungal infection type of things, like a yeast infection for a woman or athlete's foot, things like that. You can tell by actually your nails if they get kind of like crusted and yellow, things like that. That can be a sign also of a yeast infection. But yeast infection in general, like chronic yeast, could be immunocompromised. The other thing is if you have difficulty with blood sugar. Okay, so blood sugar and diabetes or pre-diabetes, that can bring on a multitude of issues as well. Bear with you. Other things that you might notice that if you have a decrease in immunity, you might have skin issues. So lots of skin, because a lot of issues with the skin, whether it could be an autoimmune issue that's presenting on your skin, such as psoriatic arthritis. It could be more of a dermatitis. It could be more of an acne. Typically, the acne type stuff shows up in women, specifically with more stress. If their androgens are out of balance, if they are more likely to have, which is like polycystic ovary disease, things like that, you're going to see more. That's something that chronic stress will do, is throw off your androgen hormones. Typically, if you have acne, that can be also more of a higher testosterone aspect, and your inability to break down testosterones into estrogen. So that's that could be a sign of that type of skin issue, could be a sign of immunity, but also could be hormone imbalance as well. So, but the other types, dermatitis, hives, things like that, those are all potentials for low immunity. Also, knowing chronic stress is actually, if you are under chronic stress, your immune system is compromised. Okay, because again, what that does is it increases. It basically, when you are in like a sympathetic nervous system, fight or flight, your body actually decreases blood flow to your organs in digestion, and it increases blood flow to more of your extremities for a fight or flight response. Okay, your body is basically getting you prepared to, fight the tiger off or whatnot. So you're getting an increase in blood sugar, which is also feeding infection or yeast infection, things like that. You're getting a increase in blood pressure. You're getting a decrease in digestion, absorption, blood flow to, you're essentially running on your primitive brain, and you're working to fight or or flee. But doing that chronically will absolutely decrease your ability to fight inflammation and decrease your immunity. So it's important to understand that. And it's important to understand that, with, the current virus, the thing that's thrown people into, major problems in the hospitals and with, those severe to moderate to severe cases are, issues of what's called silent hypoxia. So you had underlying issues and your oxygen levels were getting really low, particularly if you have blood pressure issues. Blood pressure issues, we know that the SARS-2 virus will connect to our ACE2 receptors, which are higher in patients with certain blood pressure issues, specifically on specific meds. So this gives more opportunity for the virus to attack these individuals. And so what that's happening after a while, if your body is not able to fight this infection off, is eventually you're getting into a hypoxic state, which is a very low oxygen state without knowing it. And that's not, from what I've researched and gathered, there's not a certainty on why that particularly is, why they're like the functioning and hypoxia is so prevalent and what's causing that part. But we do know that there is the issue of the cytokine storm. Okay, and so this is where people are going downhill rapidly. They're going into the hospital, and there's things are occurring and going downhill very rapidly. So it's important for us to not only have this reactive ability for ourselves, whether you're afraid to get this virus. Immunity is key. And so things that unfortunately dampen immunity are also not being outside. So things that were being promoted, unfortunately, during being inside all the time. We're not getting diversity of microbes. We're not getting as much vitamin D as we should. We're not getting as much exercise and blood flow, which is really pertinent. So it's important to understand that if you are somebody who is having some of these immunocompromised issues, you really want to work to boost and support your immune system as much as possible, and decrease inflammation levels as much as possible, because that will help to support your immune system and help with any adverse reactions pertaining to the virus. So how can we, if you determine like, geez, I might be somebody with a low functioning immune system. And by the way, this could be also somebody who is in, this is more common in more of like a third world country, but malnutrition. So malnutrition is a big issue with the immune system. If your body can't get the nutrients it needs to help to protect and produce the cells, the white blood cells, it can't clean up the virus and infections as well. It's not going to have the ability. Your body needs essential nutrients and vitamins in order to function, in order to have regular heartbeats, in order to have regular digestion, in order to have your brain function, in order to have your muscles contract. We need essential nutrients that are within our diet or within supplementation. So if you're malnourished, you are somebody who is also immunocompromised, okay? And then there's other things that more known diseases, things like AIDS, things like lupus, those more common autoimmune issues, celiac disease, MS, things like that. Those are more common, known that they're autoimmune issues. Okay, so if you don't have any of those, but you have some of the other symptoms, you may just have a lower functioning immune system. Okay, so what you want to do is really work to support that immune system. Really want to work on supporting your gut health. So gut is key to the immune system. Supporting your gut is so important. So having a diet full of things that are like fermented foods, kimchi, sauerkraut, kombucha. Now, some of that may irritate if you have like an overgrowth of bacteria in your GI tract. That may irritate it a bit. And again, I can't tell you, this is not for diagnostic purposes or for treatment purposes, for informational purposes for you guys to take and kind of go over on your own. But diets typically in that will help to boost that commensal bacteria, that good bacteria that we want. If you can get an organic yogurts, particularly more Stonyfield, although right now I would not recommend any type of dairy because that will create more mucus production. If you are somebody who is is more concerned about having side effects of the virus, you want to decrease that mucus production. Dairy is high in creating mucus. So you want to decrease dairy as much as possible. I wouldn't recommend necessarily that be the case of where you get your probiotics from. But things you can do a supplemental probiotic, and comment below if that you guys are interested in something like that. I do have a dispensary that you can take a look at. What you essentially want is a large strain, specifically if you are somebody who has been on antibiotics for a long time, or intermittently off and on. You want to get that commensal bacteria up as much as possible. So you essentially would want, particularly if for somebody with that chronic antibiotic use, you would want an eight diverse strain of lactobacillus and bifidobacter bacteria. You would want at least 50 billion organisms. Okay. And you would want what's called FOS in it, which is fructose oligosaccharide, to help with flourishing. Now, you don't want this if you are somebody who has known small intestinal bacteria overgrowth. That would be, I wouldn't recommend that. That could irritate that. But things to help with boosting that commensal bacteria. Another thing you can do is actually gardening. So getting outside and being in the fresh air will not only increase your vitamin D, which gets activated through your skin. So we don't have to take supplemental vitamin D if we are getting out in the skin. Our bodies will naturally produce D3. It gets converted in your liver through your skin. It has to be activated by your skin. Okay. So if you are being out, you are getting vitamin D, as well as if you're doing soil, if your feet are against the ground and the grass, you're actually there's microbes in the soil. So sometimes you see kids, like, I recommend my kids get dirty, play with dirt, go in mud and stuff, to an extent, but that's actually very healthy for our bodies. Okay. You also want to make sure that you're drinking a lot of water right now. Particularly, you can add lemon or orange slices. You want a lot of vitamin C. Vitamin C is very good for the immune system, as well as a good antioxidant, which is proven to be very important with fighting off infections. And so you would want to do water each day. You want to do about an ounce per kilogram of body weight. That's the typical recommended hydration level for water. So if you are 1 ounce, a kilogram, so I think it's like 1 kilogram for every 2.2 pounds. Okay, so you guys can do the math on that. But that's really important, because if you are fighting something, say you got, the virus, you want to be able to flush out the virus, and you want to be able to keep as hydrated as possible. Okay. So those are just a few tips that I can give you guys to help with supporting your immunity, as well as understanding if you have a low functioning immune system, not necessarily a diagnostic disease process, but, knowing if you might need some support in this area. Okay. I'm Dr. Misty Gaziesco. Thank you so much for joining me on Wellness Wednesday. Comment below if you guys have any questions. I can put that link, the dispensary link, in there if you would like. I also have I have some recommendations on immune support as well, some extra recommendations in there as well. So I hope you guys have an awesome week. Please take care of yourselves, stay well, and I'll see you guys soon.